Okay, so Super Sons is like, God, it's the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now. This story is amazing, and it's so cool because I love the idea of like Jonathan Kent and Damian Wayne, of like Superman's son and Batman's son teaming up, because all they do in this story is bicker. That's it. That's all they do is bicker with each other, and it is amazing. It is so cool to see. But it also kind of highlights the strengths and weaknesses of each of the individual characters, and it does it in a way that it all kind of comes together and it all creates this really fun story. And that's what makes Super Sons so interesting. It's just fun. Like, it's just good old-fashioned fun comic book storytelling. So initially we pick up with Jonathan Kent on his way to school. And again, this is really just kind of like a reflection of everyday life, which is kind of what you have to do with Super Sons. I mean, it's not Justice League, right? Like, you can't just have them fighting one group, you know, from story to story. You know, the characters in the Justice League are well established. I mean, the Flash, you know, Green Lantern, or really the Green Lanterns, Simon Baz and Jessica Cruz, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, so on and so forth. They are all established characters. We don't need to know the intricacies of their everyday lives because we have their own solo books for that. But there's no Superboy solo book. There's no Damian Wayne solo book. I would read them, but there is no book that's out there right now for those individual characters. And so you've got to kind of put things into perspective in a way that it gives us an idea of what they stand for. And Super Sons is a great way to do that. Now, we know just by virtue of being the son of Superman, and we know by virtue of the stories that he's been in, both in the Superman comics and in the Action Comics, kind of a weird phrase, that Jonathan Kent is very much standing up for the right thing, standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves, doesn't like people being picked on, especially when it comes to snowball fights and they start throwing snowballs at people with rocks inside. They're literally just throwing snowball at folks with rocks inside. We used to do that back when I was younger. It's something I'm ashamed to admit, but we used to do that. There was one time I was in high school, I'll never forget. There was one time I was in high school, there was this guy named Coach Zuckerman, and that guy was a dick, but he was the safe teacher, and he was walking into the classroom walking into the lunchroom one day, and somebody hit him in the back of the head with a snowball. This guy turned around. He was so pissed. He was so mad. It was absolutely amazing. But anyway, so with regards to this story, to Super Sons, the cool thing about this is that we also get the ingenuity of Damian Wayne. And what we end up finding out is that Damian Wayne has not only been masquerading as the bus driver of the other kids that ride to school with Jonathan Kent, but he's also been masquerading as a substitute teacher. And that's kind of the crazy thing, right? Like, it's kind of a crazy scenario. And so the funny thing about this is that we also end up finding out that they're basically sneaking out, that they're not supposed to be, that they're supposed to be going to bed, they're supposed to be calling it a day, but it's really Jonathan Kent who's kind of corrupted by the influence of Damian Wayne, in the sense that Jonathan's gonna go to bed, he's gonna call it a day. He's very wholesome, very grounded, a kid that doesn't really break the rules. But Damian Wayne popping up is basically saying, hey, look, there is an investigation that's going on that I'm doing, there's been some break-ins, you know, I wanna go check it out, you should come with me. Now, in truth, in terms of why it is that Damian Wayne brought Jonathan Kent, we don't know. And in fact, we don't find out. But I would surmise, as smart as Damian Wayne is, he is toying with the idea of potentially enrolling Jonathan Kent into the Teen Titans, which, by the way, if Jonathan Kent joined the Teen Titans, it would be amazing. It'd make that book just so much more interesting. I mean, it's already amazing. It'd make it even better. But we'll actually talk a little bit more about that as we get to this story, because that's kind of what ends up happening. But the two of them basically sneak out, and it's kind of funny because Jonathan doesn't want to. Well, he doesn't want to sneak out of his house, but of course, Damian gets him to do it, and they end up traveling over to LexCorp. Now, this is one of the cool things about the story. This is one of the things that I love so much, is Tomasi treats the superhero community as a family in a lot of ways, right? I mean, the Justice League are very much a family, and like, well, the Suicide Squad is as close to a family as you can get when you have a bomb planet in your head and Amanda Waller's threatening to blow it up and kill you if you don't do what she tells you to. So I guess they're kind of a family to a degree. But in terms of how Tomasi puts everything together, all the superheroes are more or less a family, and that's what we would expect, right? I mean, we would expect it to play out that way. They have their own issues, they have their own groups. You've got Batman's, you know, Justice League of America, you've got the Justice League, you know, we'll probably have the Justice Society somewhere along the line, and that was even the big mantra under Jeff Johns. You know, the Justice League is a strike force, the Justice Society is a family. The idea is that if it really hits the fan, all the superheroes will be there for one another. And the way that he plays on this is with the introduction of Lex Luthor as Superman. Remember, during the last days of Superman, or I guess following the final days of Superman, the death of the New 52 Superman, the New 52 Lex Luthor stood up and took his place as Superman. In his mind, when the classic classic Superman showed up, he was considered to be a false Superman. You know, Lex Luthor looked at him and said, no, he's not the Superman that I've known for all these years. The new 52 Superman is the one that I know. He's the one that's dead. I'm going to carry on his mantle. Again, this all harkens back to Forever Evil. It all harkens back to that story that transitioned Lex Luthor from being a bad guy to being a good guy. And so because of that, one of the funny things that happens here is when he encounters Jonathan Kent and Damian Wayne, his question is like, it's a school night. Why are you guys here? Now, of course, the funny thing is, keep in mind, Lex does not know the truth about Damian or Jonathan. You know, as far as he's aware, they're just a couple of kids here. Now, I haven't read that far into like Forever Evil, and I haven't paid that much attention to Lex Luthor, but I would have to believe that somewhere along the line, he became aware of Damian Wayne and who Damian Wayne is. So at the very least, he probably knows, you know, who the character of Damian is, but he may not know that Damian is Robin. I mean, again, Tomasi kind of plays it fast and loose, and it's fine. I mean, it works for what it is. It doesn't create massive continuity errors or anything like that. You know, it just kind of asks a couple questions here and there with regards to the story. And for me, that's one of the things that kind of keeps the narrative going, is the idea of asking questions, poking around a bit, kind of saying, hey, look, is this where this fits in? Or is that where this fits in? Or something along those lines. You know, it's just one of those cool scenarios when it comes to storytelling. But suffice it to say, what ends up happening here is Damian Wayne basically uses Superboy as a distraction. And again, this is really, really cool because you know, Jonathan Kent can't fly yet. And so he basically kind of knocks Jonathan Kent off the building. Lex Luthor has to rescue him. And in the interim, Damian Wayne goes into LexCorp and starts poking around. Now, again, this is the cool thing about Damian, because Damian is in a lot of ways just as capable as Batman. And that's really the crux of this story. That's the crux of his narrative throughout DC Rebirth. If you're reading, you know, Detective Comics, if you're reading Batman, if you're reading Nightwing, you know, if you're reading Super Sons, the idea is that Damian Wayne is trying to prove that he should be the successor to the Batman mantle once Bruce Wayne retires. That's his whole stance. And that's something that DC's kind of teasing with. That's something that Tom King, you know, that Tinian, that's something that DC as a whole is teasing with and kind of toying with following the events of The Button, right? Remember, I mean, if you saw our video on The Button, you'll find it down in the description. Batman, Bruce Wayne had talked to his father, Thomas Wayne, from a different universe. And Thomas Wayne said, stop being Batman, go be Bruce Wayne, raise your son, have a life. And the implication was that at the end of The Button, that Bruce Wayne was not going to be Batman anymore, which begs the question, if that's the case, who's going to take over the role? Now, we know he's grooming like Duke for something in particular. Duke, of course, is the character who's largely prominent in All-Star Batman, but the fact remains here, the possibility is there that Damian Wayne could take over the mantle. And if I'm going to be honest with you guys, I think he's the best person suited for it. If I were going to pick a person who is going to take over the Batman mantle once Bruce Wayne leaves, I would pick Damian Wayne any day of the week. Dick Grayson's already been Batman. Tim Drake is dead as far as Batman and all those guys are concerned. You've already got Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. You've already got Kate Kane or whatever it is, Batwoman. You've already got a litany of characters who are solidified in their own roles. The last remaining Robin is Damian Wayne. Give it to him. That's my stance. I'm curious, what's your all stance on that? Who would you make the next Batman if Bruce Wayne retires? Who would you put in that position? But the fact remains here that once Lex Luthor tracks down Damian and begins to question him, Damian Wayne just really kind of toys with the idea that he's got bombs planted all throughout the private laboratory of Lex Luthor in his own LexCorp building. Now, of course, using this as a distraction, Damian and Superboy effectively just bail out. And so we actually won't see Lex Luthor for a little while. Instead, what we find out is that the real goal of Damian Wayne here was to basically download the complete security log of LexCorp, basically going through and looking at all the video footage. Now, again, this is one of the reasons why Damian is so smart. And it's one of the reasons why he is so capable, because Lex Luthor, one of the smartest men in the world, did not realize that Damian Wayne had hacked into his system. He didn't realize that. All he knew was that Damian Wayne, just some kid, had gone through and planted a whole bunch of bombs. Now, again, this is also Damian Wayne using the fact that Lex Luthor doesn't know who he is. If Lex Luthor had known who Damian Wayne was, there was probably a really good chance he would have approached the situation differently. I mean, the son of Batman, Batman's one of the smartest men, if not the smartest man in the DC universe. It would have made sense that he would have treated Damian Wayne with the same kind of respect with regards to his intellect. But regardless of how this event played out, the fact remains here that Damian Wayne, going through the footage of the security logs, basically ends up realizing that there is a kid who broke into the laboratory of Lex Luthor and basically stole something called the Amazo armor. Now, we'll get to that here in a second, because Amazo is a really cool concept in DC. It's one of the coolest things they've done for quite some time, especially during Jeff Johns' run of Justice League. But the fact remains here that going through and looking at the video footage, between Damian Wayne's intellect, his resources, and Superboy's abilities, what they end up finding out is that this kid is somebody by the name of Reggie. So, of course, jumping on the Robin motorcycle because, you know, it's Damian, why wouldn't he have a Robin motorcycle? They trace the location of Reggie back to a warehouse, only to find that the warehouse is basically just filled with the dead bodies of what looks like Reggie's family. So this story kind of borderlines on the idea of things being somewhat dark and dangerous while also maintaining kind of the fun, vibrant edge that makes Super Sons so cool. Now, that's one of the interesting things about this, where Jonathan basically says, look, I can't deal with this. These are dead bodies. These are beyond me. You know, I gotta go. We need to call Batman, Superman, let the adults handle this. And Damian Wayne says, no, we have to stay behind and investigate. And the two effectively part ways. Jonathan comes across a little girl in the woods, but both Jonathan and Damian are basically attacked by their opposite fathers, you know, or at least set upon by their opposite fathers, Superman and Batman. Now, of course, what we find out here is that these are essentially androids. These are not actually Batman and Superman. The fact remains here that we end up having, you know, of course, Damian and Superboy, you know, taking on their fathers respectively and that kind of a thing. But both of these androids are essentially deactivated by this young girl. And this is when we start to get the backstory of everything that's essentially going on here. And this is when we start to get into the idea of the Amazo virus. Now, within the realm of DC Comics, the Amazo concept comes in two forms. There's the Amazo android, and then there's the Amazo virus. The Amazo android was pretty straightforward. It was basically developed by a guy named Professor Ivo, and the Amazo android had the ability to duplicate the powers of the Justice League. It simply just like had all their powers. So as is explained here in Super Sons, is exactly how it was for the most part. Amazo was a one-man Justice League. The Flash's speed, Superman's strength, you know, so on and so forth with regards to the different powers that existed with regards to the Justice League. Now, the Amazo virus was something that was actually designed by Lex Luthor for the purpose of neutralizing the powers of metahumans who were deemed to be too dangerous. The problem was that according to virtually every form of every governing body in existence for the most part, it was deemed to be too extreme. It was deemed to be cruel and unusual punishment. And so in response, it was more or less shelved. I mean, it was used a couple times, but nothing ever really came of it until a guy by the name of Nathaniel Tyron, I think it is. I'm not going to swear to his last name, but he had basically been tasked with killing Lex Luthor, screwed it up, and then accidentally released the Amazo virus. And so what the Amazo virus did is it basically began bonding itself to hosts and giving people powers. You know, if I kind of had to make like a comparison, we could go with like the Amazo virus kind of being like the equivalent of the Terrigen Mist, so to speak. The difference is that you don't have to have a pre-existing gene in order to be given powers because of the Amazo virus. The Amazo virus just gives you abilities. Now, what these abilities were just depended on people. I mean, different people just manifested different abilities arbitrarily. There was no guessing what a person's powers were going to be. You couldn't look at a person's age and weight and height and so on and so forth and say, well, that person is probably going to have telepathy. It's just whatever power they happen to get. Now, for the most part, after a while, the power simply just began to dissipate. People began to lose them, but there were some individuals who kept them. And the family of Reggie is one of the families that kept those powers. The issue with this is that for the most part, their powers were largely self-contained. They were largely isolated to themselves, meaning that they had like super strength or they could fly or something like that. In the case of Reggie, he could duplicate himself. And whenever he duplicated himself, each duplicate had the same ability as all the other versions. So they were all equals. It wasn't like when he duplicated himself, his power began to decrease with each duplicate. So it's not like, you know, he had two versions of himself and each one had 50% of the total power. It was, you know, he duplicated himself and each one of them have 100% of his total power. The problem with this was that Reggie began to go awry and began to effectively lose his mind. And so what he did is he actually started creating these robotic duplicates of his family and then just started routinely killing his family all the time. But the more he began to devolve into the realm of insanity, the more he began to go about stealing like Amazo armor and Amazo tech and different things like that. And so what this did is it allowed him to duplicate himself and then using the Amazo armor, allow him to duplicate the powers of anybody that he comes into contact with. Now, that's a big difference here. He's almost like Protege from Marvel Comics. You know, Protege had the ability to duplicate the powers of anybody as long as he saw them using their powers. Anyone from a person with super strength all the way up to the living tribunal. He could just copy whatever their abilities were. Reality warping, telepathy, telekinesis, the whole 9 yards. With Reggie, he has to be within the vicinity of a person in order to duplicate their powers. So it's really more passive than anything else. He doesn't have to see Superboy flying. He doesn't have to see Superboy using super strength. He just has to be around him. And then the Amazo suit will just automatically duplicate those powers and allow Reggie to use them. Now, the reason reason why this is so cool and the reason why it matters so much is because this presents a legitimate, credible threat to the world that the Super Sons are going to be dealing with. And that's why this is cool, is because it would have been very easy for Tomasi to just kind of pawn it off and be like, here's Super Sons Volume 1, and they're going to stop a bank robbery. I mean, it was entirely possible that he could have done that. It would have drugged down the narrative of the story, and it wouldn't have been nearly as good as it is right now. Instead, he gave us a kid that has the ability to duplicate himself, and then took the Amazo armor, and now has all these duplicates running around that have the ability to copy the powers of others and effectively create a super-powered army for himself. And so because of this, what we also learn is that this sister, because she's basically a robot, she still has the Amazo powers of herself, of her normal human counterpart, meaning she has the ability to control machinery. And so for the most part, these, robotic forces of Reggie are pretty much taken out pretty fast. I mean, it's not a great big huge ordeal, but they're taken out pretty quickly. And of course, this results in Damian Wayne and Superboy basically taking off. Now, of course, along the way, while they're trying to find Reggie, of course, what we end up having is Damian Wayne just kind of hijacking one of the cyborgs, meddling with his helmet, but we don't really find out what it is that they're doing. Instead, we still get like all these references from Superboy, Jonathan Kent, talking about the Teen Titans and different things like that. And that's one of the funny things, is because one of the big questions people had when Super Sons was essentially launched and when Jonathan Kent was introduced as the son of Superman in the modern day, the question was, why is he not on the Teen Titans? Well, the answer that's given by Damian Wayne is that Jonathan Kent's just not old enough. It's the Teen Titans, not the pre-Teen Titans. And so once Jonathan hits like 13 or 14 years old, then he'll probably be inducted onto the team, just because Damian would be foolish not to have the son of Superman on the Teen Titans. It seems like a stunt that he would pull, but he'd be foolish to not do that. And so of course, with the two of them being captured by Kid Amazo, simply because of the fact that the powers of Jonathan come and go, because he doesn't have full control of his faculties yet, this inevitably leads to basically Kid Amazo just kind of dumping the whole plan and talking about everything that he's doing and his goal to basically take over the world. But that's why this is so cool, is because with an army of robots that can duplicate the powers of everybody that they come across, he could conceivably do that. He could literally take out the Justice League and take out the Green Lanterns if they arrived on Earth, and could actually conquer the world. This is why Tomasi's out, the way that he basically ends this story, is done so well. The reason this happens is because of the fact that the robots can only copy organic powers, legitimate powers, meaning powers that are inherently natural to a person or powers that are bestowed on a person. With Lex Luthor, it's not that way. Lex Luthor, Superman's suit, is not designed using, Superman's genes. It's not designed using, Kryptonian DNA. It's basically just a technological suit. It's machinery. And that's why it works, is because what we end up having is Lex Luthor arriving onto the scene after Damian Wayne had used that helmet to send Lex a message and saying, here is the kid who's been breaking into LexCorp, come and get him and defeat this guy. This kid is not able to duplicate the powers of Lex Luthor because Lex Luthor has no powers. He's simply just using a mechanized suit. If he had brought in, Superman, then suddenly we would have these Amazo robots with the full power of Superman, and Superman would easily be defeated when 5 or 6 of them, maybe even 10 or 11 of them team up on him, and that would be the end of that. The Super Sons would probably be killed, and then the world would just be ripe for the picking from Kid Amazo. So again, it's really, really good thinking on behalf of Tomasi in order to give this story a legitimate out. Now, of course, while Lex Luthor is dealing with the forces of Kid Amazo and Kid Amazo himself, Jonathan and Damian, get the girl and her family out of there, and they really just kind of call it a day. I mean, you end up having Kid Amazo, who's ultimately defeated once he begins recalling all these versions into himself. And the reason why he's defeated is because of the fact that his sister uses her control over machinery to force the Amazo armor off of Kid Amazo. And so from here, Reggie basically just kind of begins to break down and lose his mind. Now, the explanation that's given here by Tomasi is that Reggie's just been splitting himself time and time again. The more he split himself, the more unstable he became, and the more he stressed his body's physical structure. Now, that actually makes sense. That is an explanation that makes sense within the context of this story. And the reason why is because there's a litany of superheroes all across the realm of comics who can duplicate themselves. That's not new. And none of them really go insane by virtue of duplicating themselves. But that's because they have training. They've been doing it for some real measure of time. With Reggie, he doesn't have formal training. He has whatever times he's been doing it, but he's kind of pushing himself too hard, too fast. And because of that, his body does not know how to handle the experience of being stretched into so many versions of himself in such an extreme way. Instead, it's almost like a rubber band. Eventually, it'll just snap back. And when it does, his mind will go with it. So Reggie isn't really killed so much as he's just incapacitated. And that's really the end of that. While Lex Luthor is kind of talking to this young girl and saying, look, we'll find you a home, we'll find you a place to stay, and we'll get you on the road to becoming a legitimate superhero given your ability to control machinery, Damian Wayne and Jonathan Kent bail out. They take off. They go home, and it's really kind of funny because once they get back to Jonathan Kent's house, they have to deal with the most formidable enemy, which is a very angry mom. So there's like two kinds of comic books in the world, right? Like comic books that are good, and then there's comics that are like the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth, and Super Sons is one of those. God, I love this story so much. Super Sons is so fun because it's just like this question that was asked: what if we created a story where we have a couple of like kids with superpowers just goofing off? Yeah, man, let's write that story. Or what are we gonna call it? Super Sons. So the cool thing about this is, remember, Super Sons focuses heavily on Damian Wayne, the biological son of Bruce Wayne, and Jonathan Kent, the biological son of Superman. And it's cool because over the course of their publication history, we've seen Superman and Batman friends, we've seen them enemies, we've seen them in almost every scenario in terms of how friends relate to each other. And so it makes sense that if the two of them were gonna have sons, their sons would follow the exact same path. And that's the cool thing about this, because while the writing's better than it was back in the 1940s and 1950s and 60s in a lot of different ways, what you guys are reading right now is basically what we saw in the early stories way back in, before Crisis on Infinite Earths with Batman and Superman. We saw some bickering, but for the most part, they always got along. Again, this story comes from the aftermath of the first Super Sons video we did, which basically saw them taking on Kid Amazo, which was a guy who basically began going through and duplicating the powers of other heroes and then using them with the intention of world domination. Now, of course, it was a little kid and it was largely just Superman and Batman's abilities and powers that were being copied, and that was really about it. But in this instance, because of the fact that Damian Wayne had basically grabbed Jonathan Kent and took him on the adventure, when it was all said and done, they were both grounded because they're both kids and they both basically snuck out. This is the immediate aftermath to all that, in the sense that Damian Wayne is basically grounded. Now, the other half of this is that so is Jonathan Kent, but he's grounded away from being able to use his powers. Now, I'll be honest with you guys, Jonathan Kent is like my favorite character in DC right now. He is hilarious. Like, I absolutely love his whole thing because he's so young and vibrant and like brings a fresh perspective to comics. And that's the cool thing about him in DC, is because for a lot of teenagers, they went through the same thing that he did, right? Like, you go through here, you look at this whole Jonathan Kent thing, and a lot of teenagers went through the same situation. I mean, remember, he's basically in his preteen years. He's not quite a teenager yet, but he's approaching that point in his life when he wants independence, when he wants to be able to go out and form his own little niche in the world. Now, he's not experienced enough. He doesn't have the wherewithal to know the kind of dangers that are out there, but that's the give and take that comes with being a teenager. It's you basically battling against your parents. And so in this case of Jonathan Kent, the biggest issue that he has is that Lois Lane and Superman are wanting to move back to Metropolis. Now, remember, in DC Rebirth, when it came to Action Comics and the Superman comics, basically two stories, both detailing the life of Superman and his supporting characters, while they were telling two different events, the common theme between Action Comics and Superman is that it dealt with the idea of wrapping up all loose ends. It dealt with the idea of removing the New 52 Lois Lane. It dealt with the idea of removing the New 52 Superman and taking classic Lois Lane and classic Superman and putting them in their place. And so what this has basically happened, what it's really come to at the time this story is being written, and especially when it comes to Superman comics, is that it basically focuses on this idea that they are now in their positions, they're now in their roles, and DC's taking the next logical step, which is to move them to Metropolis. The problem with this is, like any kid in that scenario, Jonathan doesn't like change. Now, that's a common thread when it comes to like just human beings in general, right? Like, we get used to things being a certain way, we get accustomed to things being a certain way, and we don't like it when they change. And so in this instance, Jonathan knows the life that he lives. He knows the friends that he has. He knows the environment of Hamilton County. He does not want to move away from that, lose the life that he's built on the auspices that he has to go move forward, move to Metropolis, and start a life anew. The other half of this is that, again, he's growing into becoming this angsty kid, challenging barriers. And so because of the fact that he'd been grounded from using his powers, he lashes out and simply saying, well, you guys just want to take everything that I love and care about, and you guys want to move me to a town that I don't know anything about, hiding me away from the world. It's all this frustration, all this irritation, all this young angstiness just coming to bear and him just lashing out into the world. And so because of this, because of the fact that he looks at his current predicament as basically being a byproduct of Damian Wayne grabbing him and then taking him into this conflict against Amazo, he does what any young kid that doesn't really know what's going on, he does exactly what they would do, and he just goes after Damian Wayne. Now, this is cool because this is really kind of like this toned down comedic, but still somewhat having ties to the battles of Superman and Batman. Now, of course, much like the Batman-Superman stories, this follows the exact same way, in the sense that they basically fight one another, but it's a fight to a stalemate. stalemate. Now, in truth, this is all just about inexperience. I mean, Damian Wayne is very, very capable in what he can do, but Jonathan Kent is not. But what Jonathan Kent lacks in experience, he makes up for in durability and speed and strength, so on and so forth. And so again, what ends up happening here is with the two of them trying to beat the crap out of one another and not doing a very good job, the whole conflict is suddenly stopped by Alfred. Alfred basically walks in and he's like, what in the world is going on here? Now, of course, this leads to Damian Wayne having this genius idea of crawling into a hatch. This is basically in the, well, there's no other way to say it, basically in the anus of the giant dinosaur inside the Batcave. And of course, Alfred calls him out and tells him to get out of that thing. Now, the cool thing about this is Alfred basically hits back home at all really the progression of Superman and Batman. And that's really where the meat and potatoes of the discussion in this video really resides here. When it comes to Batman and Superman, and we've talked about this a million times before, back when DC first made them, there was no shared universe. You just had Batman stories, you had Superman stories, and that was it. They never crossed over, they never met. There was really no reason to. It wasn't until Superman issue number 75 that Batman and Superman met one another. And when they did, it opened up this whole new world because fans of Batman and fans of Superman were like, oh my God, they're meeting each other. And it was like the coolest thing ever because that gave rise to stories. If they're friends, then what would happen if they team up? What kind of stories could we get after that? That's exactly what DC started doing. All the world's finest stories, things like that, the crossovers that happened later on down the line. The idea here is that Alfred really makes the case that over the years, the two of them have fought quite a bit. They really just lashed out at each other time and time again. But that's because it took time for them to trust one another. It took time for that friendship to fully blossom. It took time for Batman to say, there's like two people in this world that I trust. One's Alfred and one's Superman. There have been instances over the course of their publication history when that trust has been questioned in a multitude of different ways. Tower of Babel is probably one of the first stories that you're thinking about right now, when Batman's database on how to defeat each member of the Justice League was thrown into the limelight when Ra's al Ghul stole that information and used it against the Justice League. Batman basically had to stand before the League and say, Ra's al Ghul got that information because I assembled it and put it in the Batcave. In case any of you guys went crazy, I didn't trust you enough to believe that you would stay sane. I believed that if you guys went nuts, there'd have to be a way to take you down. That in and of itself is not a bad thing. The fact that he hid it from the Justice League is what made them question his loyalties. But again, this really brings into the sharp relief the whole Batman, Superman fight and different things like that. Now, to be honest with you guys, I never bought into the idea that Batman could beat Superman. Not a chance. It's Superman. The guy was pulling planets out of a dying galaxy just because DC wanted to show that he had nothing else to do. That was like the first few panels of a story, and then the actual story happened. I mean, sure, you know, there's been stories where Batman beats Superman, but like if we sat down for a second and we were like, I mean, who would really win? That fight would be 1 page long, and it would be Batman saying something to piss Superman off, and Superman would grab Batman and throw him into the sun. Or maybe he doesn't throw him into the sun. So maybe Superman takes him all the way out to the edge of the explored universe, drops him off, and then comes back to Earth. Hey, Batman, just like paddle really hard. Maybe you'll make it back in like 500 million years. I have no idea. Seriously, let's just say this. Batman cannot beat Superman. Mr. Sunday Movies had an amazing video where he's like, Superman could just like kick his head off or like break his neck or use heat vision to heat his face up and then make his brain overheat. Anyway, that whole issue aside, the funny thing about this is that when it comes to Jonathan, in terms of how he relates to his current situation, the idea is that Superman really sits down and says, okay, maybe we were wrong for keeping your powers in check. Maybe we were wrong for basically kind of hindering this ability. Because remember, Superman's moral compass derives from a combination of what he learned from the Kents, but also the idea that he had to come to grips with his powers. How is he going to use those powers? And that's how it is for Jonathan Kent. Despite Lois and Superman trying to treat their son like he's a normal kid, he's not a normal kid. He's a kid with incredible abilities. And so if they're going to raise him to become a productive member of society, his powers have to be a part of that. They have to be part of that equation. And so that's what this turns into. It really turns into Superman basically saying, okay, I got to pitch this to Lois. I got to get my wife to agree. But it's basically simply saying Jonathan is going to forge his own path in the world. This also seems to hint at the idea that Jonathan will be inducted into the Teen Titans. Now, of course, this came out before the Teen Titans issue of the whole thing with Jonathan and Damian and so on and so forth, but it's a cool little one-shot. It's a fun little story. Just this idea that Jonathan is really just kind of growing into his own, stepping out and becoming more of a hero as opposed to a kid who just kind of hung around his dad and watched his dad do some cool things. Oh man, guys, we're finally here. And we really needed it. Like, we really needed this because I think it only made sense, right? I mean, when you look at like DC Comics, You know, you got Batman and Superman. They're like the 1-2 punch of like the comic book world, not just DC, but like the comic book world. I mean, there's Batman and Superman, and then there's everybody else. You know, they go in hierarchies after that, but they'll stand the test of time as the two most popular. And over the years of their publications, we've seen them as friends, we've seen them fight, you know, we've seen uneasy alliances, we've seen strong friendships that have lasted generations, we've seen all different kinds of things with their characters, but we've never really seen an instance like this where their sons became friends. You know, where their sons would go on to carry on the mantle, or at least be the first steps in carrying on the mantle of their fathers. Now, with regards to this story, what we initially do here is we pick up with Jonathan Kent. Now, keep in mind, one of the funny things about his character, and this is one of the things I like about him so much, is despite the powers that he will one day possess, and despite the power, you know, I guess the godly level abilities that he will one day inherit, at this moment right now, he's still just a kid. And so he has all the same thoughts as kids, he views the world like a kid does, and that was the basis behind him being raised the way he was by Superman. It would have been very easy for Superman and Lois Lane to tell him, oh, you're gonna be a god one day, and you're gonna be wildly powerful, and for him to allow that to go to his head and view himself as somebody who's gonna be, you know, this dictator, grandiose kind of person. But instead, they kept him down to earth. They were like, you do not use your superpowers, your super speed to carry groceries in the house. You carry them in just like everybody else. You're gonna do chores, you're gonna do all these things that kids do. So they would give him a strong work ethic. They would give him a strong understanding of what it means to be a contributing member of society. One of the other ways this shows itself is with some kid that's giving him a hard time. Now, this kid's not wildly important, but what is important is how Jonathan deals with him. With this kid being a bully, he's probably a bully because his life sucks. That's usually what happens with most bullies. Their lives are really bad and they just kind of express it outward by being angry. But Jonathan could have easily just killed this kid. I mean, he could have just punched his head off. I mean, he could have killed him in any one of 1,000 ways. But instead, he's just like, I'm not gonna worry about him. I'm gonna ignore him, because that's what he was taught to do. That's what a normal human being does. You ignore those people who are bullies, you kind of blow them off, let them, you know, deal with their own misery, and whatever happens to him, happens to him. You know, you go on with your life, you continue on with your life, and you enjoy how great your life is. And that's what Jonathan was taught to do. But the other half of this is that once he leaves the school, he runs into a girl named Maya Descartes. Now, Maya Descartes is a character that came out of the whole Robin Son of Superman / Batman and Robin line of stories as part of the New 52. And those stories dealt with, you know, the expansion of Damian Wayne and the New 52 line of stories. It dealt with the backstory of his character in the New 52. It dealt with, you know, him being raised by his mother as an assassin, the Year of Blood, when he was killing people and his attempts to make up for all that. But during these line of stories, there was a guy named Morgan Descartes, and Morgan Descartes was, he was almost like Batman if Batman had become like if he had followed the teachings of the League of Assassins, in the sense that Morgan Descartes had no problem torturing and killing people for information. This eventually led to him coming into conflict with Batman and Damian eventually killed Morgan. And because of this, his daughter Maya, who was, you know, almost every ounce an assassin as he was, swore a vendetta against Damian Wayne. But what happened is, in her attempts to track him down and to kill him, she basically became this former villain's now ally, where she basically works alongside Damian Wayne. And in fact, her being here is at the request of Damian. This is actually what's kind of interesting, is because as the two of them get together, you know, as the two of them spend time talking to one another, it's really just this kind of glimpse of a thing. It doesn't really seem to be anything major. And eventually Jonathan and the young girl that he's with leave, and then she takes off for her own thing because she's terrified of being in this weird like swamp place. But the funny thing about this is that because of the fact that Jonathan is still very much a kid, he's scared of the same kind of things kids are. He really lets his imagination run away with him. And so we start seeing things and he starts hallucinating, and some of this is the work of Maya Descartes, but the result is that Maya basically takes him by surprise, and it seems like she ambushes him along with Goliath. Now, Goliath also came out of those early stories with Damian, and during the time when he was tasked to be an assassin, he basically had to go and capture this weird scepter thing, but he had to eliminate all these beasts that were guarding this scepter, and he chose not to eliminate, you know, the smallest of them. And the reason why is because the smallest of them touched his humanity. It basically made him cry for a second. And because of this, he swore to take it as his own and raise it as his faithful companion, more or less. And so Goliath has basically been there ever since. It's really kind of like a mascot for Damian Wayne. And there are fans out there who love Goliath, who are like, Goliath is amazing, because despite not being human and being able to talk, Goliath has a lot of personality in terms of how it relates to things. It's like the C-3PO of the Damian Wayne line of stories. But the fact remains here that, you know, Maya Descartes at least seems to initially take out Jonathan Kent alongside Goliath. And then when Jonathan wakes up, he's being held captive by Damian Wayne. And this is where things get hilarious, you know, because Damian's like, dude, you're a danger, man. Like, you're a dangerous person. You have powers that you don't really know about them yet, you know, but you're going to manifest those eventually. You don't know how to control them. You killed your cat. I mean, it's it's hilarious because, you know, Damian in and of himself is extremely capable. Damian's very, very capable in terms of his abilities, but he's still just a kid too. And that's the cool thing about about this is, this story puts that into perspective. It reminds us that even though Damian Wayne's one of the best assassins in the world, even though Jonathan is the son of Superman, in a lot of ways, like, they're kids. They're young kids, they're young boys, and they see the world in a young way. And so what happens is, with Damian Wayne interrogating Jonathan Kent, Batman shows up and he's like, what the hell have you done? And Damian's like, well, I'm interrogating him because he's dangerous. And he's like, dude, you have no idea what you've just done. And then suddenly Superman comes barging in. Now, this is the kicker, because Superman's pissed. Someone kidnapped his son. Of course, he was able to find him, but his initial reaction is Batman had his son kidnapped. And so he's not Superman angry at Batman, because he views him as a bad guy. He's a concerned father. He's an angry father whose son went missing. It's like taking cubs from Mama Bear. You just only someone with a death wish would do something like that. And so, of course, as soon as Superman gets here, Batman tries to talk him down. He's like, hey man, look, this is not what you think it is. And he's able to do that, but only because of the fact that Jonathan creates a barrier between the two of them. He's like, look, you guys need to chill. You guys need to relax. And it gives them some much needed time to stop, panicking, and it gives them some much needed time to talk. But also, because of her stealth abilities, the initial idea of Maya is that no one's gonna know she's there. But Superman picks up on her immediately. I mean, just because of his hearing and his seeing and so on and so forth. And so Maya basically has to reveal herself, to everybody. But in any event, the idea here is that Batman, while Jonathan is here, they begin to sort of examine Jonathan. And the reason why is because, as we've seen in the Superman line of comics, and even in the more recent issues of Action Comics, Superboy or Jonathan Kent's powers are manifesting, but they're intermittent. And so he will have durability, but then he won't. He'll have heat vision, and then he won't. And the question is why? Is it because he's just a growing boy, or is it because there's something going on with him? Now, on the surface, this seems totally unimportant. It seems totally unessential, but it's extremely important, because what this does is it shows us that Superman's just like any father ever. Every single parent ever, if their kid comes down with a cough, it's, oh my God, why is my kid coughing? Is it because they have a cold, or is it because there's something seriously wrong? Parents have an instinct to ensure their children stay protected, even after their children grow into adults. It's just a parental instinct. It's just a thing that people do. And so for Superman, maybe he's overreacting, maybe he's not, but the way he's acting is very much like any father. And so it's basically Tomasi telling us, yeah, Superman's got these godly abilities. Yeah, he can move planets, and he's fought Darkseid, and he fought Doomsday, all that kind of stuff. And when it comes down to it, he's also a dad. Like, he's also just a dad worried about his son. And so from here, we transition to Damian Wayne and Jonathan. And Damian's basically giving Jonathan, a tour around the Batcave and the things that are there. And we get to see Batcow. Batcow, yeah! Batcow's amazing. I don't know how many of you guys know about Batcow, but it ran out in front of a car. Batcow. Batcow is awesome, but again, Tomasi just kind of gives us this rivalry between the two, and he actually has, Jonathan punch Damian, but it's just kind of this rivalry between the two, more or less, not really saying they hate each other so much as they view each other as rivals. And this is really kind of cool, because Damian wouldn't consider Jonathan Kent a rival if Jonathan Kent wasn't somebody worth worrying about. Now, a lot of what Jonathan Kent's doing here is just reactionary to the goading, to the prodding that Damian Wayne is putting towards him, but because Damian knows how skilled he is in terms of his abilities, because he's trained under the League of Assassins, and because he's trained under Batman, he knows what he's capable of. But the fact that he looks at Jonathan and sees him as a rival tells us just how capable Jonathan is as well, even if he doesn't know it. And so because of the fact that the two of them are fighting amongst each other, this is very indicative of how things were between, Batman and Superman when they first met. Every time they meet with a reboot or anything like that, they always fight one another, but then they always realize they're both going for the same goal, and they end up becoming partners. Sometimes it takes a little while for them to transition to being friends. Sometimes it happens right off the bat, but the fact remains that there's usually always a conflict between the two of them. But instead of something allowing these two to work things out with due time, instead what happens is they basically say, look, we're going to put them through a boot camp. We're going to force them to work together. And either at the end of all this, they're going to come out as teammates, or they're going to come out as enemies, and there's nothing we can do. And so what we do is we pick up out in the wilderness, out in the middle of nowhere, where they've basically just been dropped off by Batman and Superman, and they're kind of left to their own devices. Damian Wayne doesn't have his various gadgets with him, and Jonathan's powers aren't in full activation, so he doesn't really know how to use them completely. Plus, he doesn't have the ability to fly yet, and so there are a lot of drawbacks to him. So in a lot of ways, he's just almost as powerless as Damian Wayne. But the other half of this is it's not as though Batman and Superman abandoned them, not at all. You got Superman in the sky watching everything happen as they're making their way detour these 3 challenges are supposed to undergo. But you've also got Batman who's watching these events unfold as well. And so, they haven't left. I mean, it's not like they're going to let them die. Nothing like that. It's simply just trying to get the 2 of them to work together. And initially, it's really this thing of each time they pass a challenge, they basically receive something. They receive part of their uniforms, or they receive some gadgets. And it's basically just saying you guys need to work together to get past these challenges. And by getting past these challenges together, you're going to form a bond, or at the very least, you're going to form a mutual respect for one another, so that even if you don't become the best of friends, you're going to have a respect for what the other's capable of. Now, the other half of this is that while they're working together, while they're trying to get through this, of course, Maya shows up periodically, but they also have to fight against Goliath. And, again, this is really one of those things where, because it's not, a super deadly situation, initially Damian calls Goliath off, but Goliath, doesn't respond right off the bat. Eventually he does, but he doesn't respond right off the bat. But more so than that, with these different traps and scenarios that have been set up, there are a couple close calls. There are a couple instances where it's possible that they will die. And in fact, there is an instance where Alfred says, hey, look, we need to step in, and Batman says no. Superman, like Alfred tells Superman, you got to get in there, you got to save him, and Batman says no. Now, this is very important because it highlights the very different methods by which Batman and Superman relate to their sons. Because Batman, lives within Gotham City and exists to protect Gotham City in and of itself, Damian Wayne's experience as part of the League of Assassins meant that once he showed up at Batman's side, he was already ahead of the curve. He already knew how to fight. He already knew how to engage a multitude of enemies and how to take them out. He was already capable in terms of his abilities. So Batman didn't really have to do a whole lot. The only thing he had to do was really curb Damian Wayne's bloodlust and teach him that it's not okay to kill everybody that you come across. It's not okay to kill every villain that you fight. With Jonathan, however, he basically lived in the suburbs, and so he was never exposed to constant conflict. He was never tested in the fires of death and destruction. And so he's basically coming out of this as a chalkboard, as a completely clean board. And so he's basically learning how to fight as he fights. He's learning how to survive as he survives. Now, it doesn't mean that he's incapable of doing these things. It simply means that for him, he's basically learning what it means to be a hero outside of the bits and pieces of wisdom that he gets from his father. Now, eventually, this sort of mutual respect begins to blossom into a friendship when the 2 of them are with Goliath, and they basically spend the night camped out, in order to figure out what they're going to do when the morning comes around. But there's a really funny scene here, and this is actually really touching. I really like this. But there's a really cool scene where Jonathan offers Damian a granola bar. Now, Damian does the right thing, and he turns it down. But in the end, he ends up taking it anyway, which I'm not sure why he did. I can't think of very many men that would willingly eat granola bars. Benny, I'm talking about you. So, the 2 of them also come to the realization on what it is that Batman and Superman are looking for, right? I mean, they're not in this with no idea of what's going on. They know that Batman and Superman want them to work together. And in truth, it's really just stubbornness. It's the stubbornness of boys. To kind of sidetrack here for a second, guys and a lot of boys have a very high level of pride. Damian especially in this story. Jonathan, not so much, but Damian definitely has a lot of pride. I always liken Damian to Vegeta from Dragon Ball Z in the sense that Damian does not like admitting when he can't do something. He doesn't like appearing weak because he was taught that weakness, or to show weakness, is a failure and it'll lead to death. Batman has curbed that and said, hey, look, it's always okay to ask for help if you need help. But Damian still has a very hard time dealing with that. It's one of the reasons why Damian does have a lot of people that hate him. I love his character because watching him evolve from where he used to be to where he is now is one hell of a journey to witness. It's an incredible experience. When you go through and you read Batman and Robin and you read, Robin, son of Batman, they're just some extremely well told stories if you can read between the lines. But ultimately, because the 2 of them come to this realization on what Batman and Superman are looking for, but they kind of come to this unwritten exception that, yeah, they need to work together. They come to this unwritten agreement that, yes, they basically have to help one another. The issue with this is that once the night passes and we get back into the day, it almost seems like the exact same situation. They just don't really work together like they should. And the result is that an artificial hurricane ends up leading to the 2 of them being caught unawares and presumably being defeated or more or less failing the challenge. And so Superman basically shows up and says, hey, look, like you guys failed in this endeavor. You guys were supposed to be taught to work as a team. The costumes that you wear are not just costumes to look good. The costumes that you wear aren't just cool because we we all know that having a cape is amazing. Like, the costumes that you wear stand for something important. It stands for teamwork. It stands for sacrifice. It stands for putting other people above yourself. It stands for the fact that those people who stand beside you in conflict are people that have to be able to trust you. And if they can't trust you, then you might as well not be there. It stands for some very, very important things. And this is a lesson they simply haven't learned. And so, you know, Superman tells them, you guys just simply aren't ready for this. You guys are not ready for this particular challenge. And so making their way back to the Batcave, once they arrive, you know, with Superman having taken off before them, once they get there, they find that Batman and Superman are under attack. Now, of course, you know, this is designed to basically teach them this final lesson. You know, this is designed to teach them that their lives, the lives of people around them, depend on them working together. That's really the basis behind this. You know, is to teach them that when other people's lives are on the line, it's not the time to bicker and it's not the time to argue. It's the time to put yourself in the background and put the lives of other people first. And that's exactly what Damian and Jonathan do. And it's spectacular to see. You know, Damian Wayne is so intelligent when it comes to conflict, when it comes to strategic aspects, when it comes to being tactical. But Jonathan also has some strong abilities, things that Damian just can't do. And so using Damian's intelligence alongside Jonathan's abilities complement each other perfectly. And so they're able to overcome this force and they're able to free their fathers. And so in doing so, Superman and Batman basically sit down and they say, that's what you guys are now. You guys are not just random dudes anymore. You know, you're not just a couple kids running around with costumes wanting to play superheroes. You guys are superheroes now. You guys are protectors of the planet Earth in the best way you know how, that you guys are effectively super sons. So with that being said, we're going to bring this video to an end. Again, this is just a little two-part story, but damn, I thought it was good. I thought it was so fun. I can't wait to see what we get from these two guys. And I'll be honest with you, you know, once the powers of Jonathan allow him to actually step into the official Superboy mantle in terms of what he's capable of and fight some reasonable foes right alongside his dad, I'd love to see these two on the Justice League, to be honest. I'd love to see Barry Allen and Batman and Superman, you know, and you know, the Green Lanterns and Damian Wayne and Jonathan Kent. I'd love to see them there. Or at the very least, we get something that's a return of like Young Justice or something along those lines, you know, that kind of throws them in there. I mean, I guess we have Teen Titans. I guess you could put Jonathan Kent on Teen Titans. Hell yeah, you could put Jonathan Kent on Teen Titans. Man, dude, I would... Man, dude, Super Sons. Super Sons of Tomorrow. Man, let me tell you something. Dude, this story is so good. Dude, the cliffhanger at the end of this video. You guys are gonna be pissed. Oh man, it is gonna be, man, this story is amazing. Okay, so in the last video that we did, outside of the Blackest Night, Great Big Huge Thing, we covered Detective Comics' A Lonely Place of Living. And that story basically brought back Tim Drake of the future. You know, this idea that Tim Drake became Batman of tomorrow and was trying to basically make his life better by changing the past. The cool thing about this is that it sort of expands a little bit and it brings his character back for the same purpose, not really for his own life, but for the lives of millions of people. Now, this is interesting because in a lot of ways, Tim Drake of tomorrow is kind of being turned into this Cable-esque character. And I'm actually not against that. For those of you guys who don't know, Cable is a character from Marvel Comics who's basically a retcon machine. Whenever Marvel wants to change anything, they just send it back into the past. And Cable magically changes it using time travel. That's one of those instances I was talking about in the Detective Comics video, where we talked about how Marvel usually uses time travel as a plot device, as opposed to a means to either expand on existing things or to sort of hint at what may happen later on down the line, or even introduce new characters. The cool thing about this is that initially it picks up with just Bruce Wayne kind of, apparently he's just reading a book, just sort of chilling, when he's suddenly met with the arrival of future Tim Drake. Now, again, and this is interesting because the last time they met him, he just kind of showed up from the future and he was trying to take out Batwoman. Again, the long and short was that it was more or less future Tim Drake doing what he thought was the right thing. Now, of course, this fight between Tim Drake and Batman is pretty interesting because it's one of these scenarios where Tim Drake's kind of put into his place almost immediately. And that's one of the cool things about this, where there's a lot of kind of back and forth with regards to the idea that Tim Drake is taunting Bruce Wayne because he's not taking the time to understand his motivations. In truth, he doesn't really need to, because fresh off the mind of Bruce Wayne is the idea that Tim Drake showed up from the future previously to kill Batwoman. And so in this instance, it's the exact same scenario. But this is like when Bruce Wayne fought Damian Wayne in Injustice. Do not be confused about your place in the bigger picture. That's what this is. You know, Tim Drake, sure, he puts on the Batman mantle, he puts on the cloak and cowl, but he ain't Batman. He's not Bruce Wayne. And that's exactly what this is. Where previously, he basically, he knocked out Bruce Wayne by playing on a weakness. Bruce usually always learns. And so in this instance, he takes him out quick, fast, and in a hurry, or at least he's immediately on him that fast and doesn't really spare spare a whole lot of time for emotion, sentiment, different things like that. I remember the circumstances are a little bit different. You know, when future Tim Drake showed up, it was a sob story and, oh, you know, things are gonna be so bad. It's not that same way anymore. Things are a lot more ruthless between the two of them. Neither of them are taking the time to learn the other's motivations. They're just immediately jumping in and they're going in for the attack. Now, again, because of the fact that this is Bruce Wayne and he is the guy who trained all the other members of the Bat family, with the exception of Damian Wayne, we would wholeheartedly expect Bruce Wayne to immediately take out Tim Drake. I mean, it wouldn't really, the fight would be pretty brutal just because Tim's learned a lot, but he's not on the same level as Bruce when it comes to being a fighter. And so again, much like we saw in the Detective Comics story, he uses subterfuge, he uses a momentary weakness. He pulls a gun and shoots Bruce. He grabs Bruce, takes him underground, you know, takes him back to the Batcave, incapacitates him, and leaves him there. And so for that point, he jumps to the Fortress of Solitude. Now this is cool because it's future Tim Drake going against Superman. Now again, this is designed to hit at that ingenuity. It's designed to hit at the idea that with Tim Drake, it's really more of brain over brawn. When it comes to like the finesse that Batman has with fighting, for example, Superman doesn't really have that. It's just, I'm gonna punch you really, really hard and hopefully you get knocked out. Of course, with a lot of this kind of taking place after the events of Oz Effect, you know, Superman kind of getting the Fortress of Solitude back in order, different things like that. Tim Drake showing up, he's immediately grabbed by Superman. Now, of course, because of the fact that Superman has things like X-ray vision, so on and so forth, super hearing, he immediately picks up on the fact that this is not Bruce Wayne. I mean, sure, a couple bullets are fired and the fact that he uses a gun is a pretty good giveaway, but he picks up on the idea that it's Tim Drake, just kind of listening to his voice, different things along those lines. But again, the intelligence of Tim Drake, the ingenuity, firing off some capsules to sort of emit this gas of sorts that slows Superman down, allowing Tim Drake the ability to basically hack into and take over the Kryptonian armor. Now, the funny thing about this is Tim should not normally be able to do that. The Kryptonian battle armor is supposed to only be used by Kryptonians because it requires you to speak and to read Kryptonian. But Tim Drake's argument is the Superman in my future is a person who taught me how to do that. And he hints at the idea that the Superman from his future is Connor Kent. So again, bringing back all that stuff into Super Sons of Tomorrow, bring back all that stuff into Tim Drake, Connor Kent becomes Superman in the future. What ends up happening is in this battle where Superman is easily able to subdue future Tim Drake, what ends up taking place is Superman himself is kind of immersed in this capsule of red solar radiation. Now, this is genius. We've seen it before. In fact, this was one of the first times that I believe red kryptonite was introduced into DC Comics when it was much the same way. Superman was trapped in like a red solar radiation capsule of sorts. But it is interesting because what this does is, again, it hits at the nature of Tim Drake, the intelligence, the ingenuity. He cannot go toe-to-toe with Superman. He does not have the power, the strength, or anything to be able to pull that off. But if he can't fight Superman head on, then work around Superman. And again, that goes back into the nature of Tim. But of course, we end up learning his motivation for being here is to take out Superboy, the son of Superman. Now, at this point, we switch over to the Teen Titans. And this is pretty cool because, you know, with basically Superman subdued, Batman subdued, this basically leaves the landscape open for everything to go on with regards to Tim Drake himself. Now, of course, watching everything unfold, showing up at the house of Lois Lane and Superman, you know, in Metropolis itself, finding that, you know, Jonathan Kent is gone when he gets there, what we end up doing is we pick up with Jonathan actually alongside the Teen Titans. Now, in truth, Jonathan is not actually a Teen Titan yet. That's kind of been an on-running theme in the Super Sons stories in the sense that basically Jonathan wants to join the Teen Titans, but he's not really a teenager. He's kind of a pre-teenager. He's about a year or two younger than Damian. And so the result is that he just really can't be on the team. It's not the pre-teen Titans, it's the Teen Titans. So, I mean, you know, same reason the Teen Titans can't really be on the Titans. But the whole idea here is that they're largely just kind of facing off against a group called the Hangmen. Now, this is par for the course when it comes to the Teen Titans, right? For those of you guys who are not reading the Teen Titans publication at the moment, it's amazing and I highly suggest you check it out. It's really one of those things where it is a great combination of what people think of when they think of Teen Titans. Historically speaking, the Teen Titans has been a team where it focuses on the interpersonal relationships of the characters, the kind of strain they ran into as a team itself, just kind of working together with their own individual personalities, how they mesh, how they conflict, and then fighting against, you know, various enemies and so on and so forth. And that's largely how the team has played out in DC Rebirth so far. You know, Damian Wayne isn't really the same kind of leader that Tim Drake was, where Tim Drake led by, you know, saying, hey, let's do this, let's do that, really feeding into the opinions, asking people how they can contribute. You know, Damian Wayne is more like, we're gonna do that, and that's just the way it is. He's really more iron-fisted. Now, that fits into the nature of Damian Wayne in terms of how he's been depicted over the course of his life in DC Comics and so on and so forth. But it is cool because where the Teen Titans is designed to focus on the interpersonal relations of the team, it's also designed to basically build up the character of Damian, kind of giving him social skills where he previously didn't really have any, didn't know how to relate to people, didn't really know how to deal with people, how to talk to people, anything along those lines. And so the result is that where they are able to hold their own to a degree, some of the enemies are taken out pretty quickly and subdued by the cops. And when the question becomes, who was it that basically took them out? If it was Kid Flash, if it was Beast Boy, whatever the case may be, we end up finding out it was actually Jonathan Kent. Now, of course, Damian Wayne is the one who figures it out and basically shoots some gas to kind of knock him out, and that's really it. But it's a funny little moment because it's, you know, it's Jonathan Jonathan just kind of sneaking out of his house to go join the Teen Titans, even though he's not supposed to be there, kind of trying to force himself onto the team. Now, in truth, Jonathan's probably one of my absolute favorite characters in DC Rebirth. I love the way his character's done, you know, because he's just a kid that's desperate to fit in. He's a kid that's desperate to be accepted. And that's kind of the irony of all this, because in truth, he's probably the most powerful member if he were to join the Teen Titans. I mean, it's basically Superman on the Justice League, just in a much smaller form. But it is cool because for the most part, the Teen Titans argument is it's not necessarily about how powerful we are, it's about how well we work as a team. And that's the big kicker. Keep in mind, you don't necessarily need Superman to win a conflict, but with regards to the whole function of the team, I mean, sure, if we have Superboy on here, then almost all of our problems will be solved. I mean, you know, once his powers begin to evolve to a point where he's on par with his father, he's exceedingly capable, then it'll start to take away from the basis of the team. Whereas if you don't have Superboy there, then you've got to, you know, focus on the powers of Starfire and Aqualad and Kid Flash and Beast Boy and, you know, Damian Wayne. You got to focus on their abilities, what it is that they can and can't do, and it creates more of a comprehensive relationship between the characters. So it is pretty cool. It is pretty interesting to see them function without Superboy, but it also kind of begs the question, when is he going to get on the team? Because we all know it's only a matter of time. But the cool thing about this is that in the middle of this whole scenario, they're all met with the arrival of Tim Drake. Now remember, when it came to DC Comics, the original Teen Titans and the New 52, it wasn't very well received by fans because a lot of people were very angry at the idea that the original Teen Titans as they knew them had gone away. Because remember guys, the Teen Titans were huge. I mean, back in the day when the Teen Titans were at their peak, they outsold everything. They outsold Batman, they outsold Superman, they outsold the Justice League. It was the highest selling publication DC had for a pretty good clip of time. Now, a lot of modern day fans of the Teen Titans come out of the show. It's one of those interesting things because there's like all these arguments that rage between like Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans. And it's hilarious. I remember we were at a con, kind of a sidetrack here. We were at a con one day and there was, we had a huge panel that we were doing and Benny made a comment about how I was watching Teen Titans Go and didn't really mind it. And people in the room were just like, boo, they hated Teen Titans Go. And it was pretty funny. It was pretty hilarious. But that's where a lot of modern day fans come from. And so because they come from that, they want to see the original iteration of the Teen Titans that they're used to. Now, DC tried to satisfy that in the New 52 with regards to a story called Titans Hunt, which was designed to kind of explain the backstory to the New 52 Teen Titans. At the end of the day, it was really more fan service. It was a mini-series. It didn't really give people the kind of satisfaction they were looking for, but 50% of something's better than 100% of nothing. So at the end of the day, they weren't too upset about it. Well, of course, with the DC Rebirth line, it does bring back a lot of the characters that people are familiar with, Starfire, Raven, Beast Boy, things like that. The team, of course, being spearheaded by Damian Wayne is a little bit different, but it does create something pretty interesting. But the whole basis behind the modern day Teen Titans is that it's really predicated on the house that Tim Drake built, so to speak. And so a lot of the technology that's been repurposed, a lot of the things that have been, you know, redeveloped or improved upon by Damian Wayne are predicated on what Tim Drake built. And that's the reason why he's able to hack into it, because effectively Damian Wayne moved into a house that Tim Drake already had the keys to. And so he's basically accessing something that he's always been able to access, because nobody would expect Tim Drake to show up here. It was very much Damian Wayne saying, what reason would Tim Drake have to come here and take over the Teen Titans? He knows it's my thing. Besides, he's off, you know, doing his own thing. So again, it is kind of interesting, but they basically let a wolf into the hen house. That's exactly what's going on here. But with regards to future Tim, his argument is, look, I am here because Jonathan Kent is going to unleash holy hell on the world. He's going to become an outright villain. And this is kind of funny because when people were reading the solicitations for Super Sons of Tomorrow, the big question they had is, will Jonathan Kent become Superboy Prime? That's one of the things that people kept asking about this. And in truth, it's not that far off. When Tim Drake basically tells Raven to read his mind and relay those thoughts to the rest of the Teen Titans, what we end up seeing is this future where you end up having Damian Wayne who becomes Batman, you end up having Jonathan Kent who becomes Superman. In this future, lines are basically drawn. The friendship between Jonathan Kent and Damian Wayne seems to have gone awry, and the result is that Jonathan Kent loses his mind, Metropolis is totally obliterated, and millions of lives are lost. And so the result is that Tim Drake is trying to keep this future from happening. And so as a result of this, he immediately subdues Jonathan Kent. The problem is that he underestimates Jonathan. Remember, when it comes to his character, his powers at the moment are tied into his emotions. He does not have the kind of control his father has. And so in this moment with Tim Drake basically underestimating Jonathan's state of mind, where he goes to subdue him and Jonathan begins to panic, suddenly his powers begin to go awry. And when they do, Damian's role is get out of here, because if you let off all this energy, you basically let off this kind of solar flare ability, you know, so to speak, from what we saw in the New 52 Superman line, you're going to kill everybody in this room. And so was quite literally Jonathan Kent racing into the sky and letting all this energy off, you know, and exploding, for lack of a better word. Raven basically protecting everybody from the blast. But then we end up finding out that this entire situation of Tim Drake in the past is being monitored in the future by 3 people. The first person is Connor Kent. Of course, you know, we've talked about him before. Connor Kent being one of the clones of Superman following the actual Superman's death back in the early 1990s. The other 2 people are characters that we have not seen yet in DC Rebirth. The first one is Cassie Sandsmark, and the second one is Bart Allen. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. That cliffhanger. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. Explanations on Cassie Sandsmark and Bart Allen will be forthcoming in the next video. Okay, so getting back into Super Sons, really the conclusion of Super Sons, which is actually really, really good. This brings back something called Hypertime. And in truth, we've kind of seen Hypertime sporadically throughout DC Rebirth. And in all honesty, I thought it was a concept that I would never have to talk about. I was hoping it was something I could just kind of avoid and just not really discuss, because Hypertime is not the best idea. I mean, it works for the purpose it serves, and it would have worked better if everybody had used it. The problem is that they didn't. So what's Hypertime? Okay, Hypertime was DC's attempt to copy Marvel's handling of the multiverse. So with Marvel, let's say that you have like a singular line on a piece of paper. So this straight line represents the main Marvel universe. Now, this line has been destroyed and created multiple times. In fact, 8 times to be exact, because the multiverse has been created and destroyed, you know, 8 different times. So we have this straight line, and this main line is just the main Marvel universe. This is the story where Bruce Banner became the Incredible Hulk. This is the story where the original Civil War event happened. So this is the main Marvel universe line. But let's say somewhere along this line, we put a dot, and we can call it 1984, and we can say Peter Parker becomes Venom. All right, so this is Secret Wars in 1984, and this is the story where Peter Parker discovers the Venom symbiote. But let's say within this dot, the following events happen. Secret Wars 1984 takes place. Peter Parker discovers the Venom symbiote. Peter Parker brings it back to Earth, and then Peter Parker goes to visit the Fantastic Four. And Reed Richards says, that's actually a sentient symbiote that you're wearing. It's a sentient organism. It's not just a black suit, and it's trying to take you over. And so Peter Parker casts it off. All that takes place in that little dot. Now, let's create a branch off line. All right, so we have a line that branches off and goes forward, keeps going along the forward and same forward direction as that main line. Now, we can say in that line, Peter Parker does not get rid of the Venom symbiote. That is how Marvel handles their multiverse. It's branch universe theory. You have a main set of events that take place, and then but what if something else happened instead? And then it branches off into an alternate universe. Now, we never really find out what happens in the future of those alternate realities. We get a story about one moment in that alternate reality. Another one of those lines may be, what if the Punisher's family was not killed in the park shootout? That's what those little branch off lines are. They're just moments in time where things broke off from the main Marvel universe. Now, this is how DC handles the multiverse. So we're gonna have 3 lines. We're gonna have one line, under that we're gonna have another line, and under that we're gonna have another line. And the very top line is called Earth 1, and the very bottom, the second line is called Earth 2, and the very bottom line is called Earth 3. And that's it. That's how DC usually handles their multiverse. Earth 1 is all the stories that have Barry Allen, at least before Crisis on Infinite Earths, all the stories that have Barry Allen. And before Crisis on Infinite Earths, Earth 2 is all the stories that had Jay Garrick, basically all the DC comics from the 1940s. And Earth 3 is called the Crime Syndicate of America, where the Justice League were bad guys. Now let's say all 3 of those lines suddenly stop. We can draw a line right through them, all right? That line that goes through all 3 lines, that's Crisis on Infinite Earths. All those universes are gone. There is no more Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, Earth S, none of that stuff exists anymore. Instead, coming out of those 3 lines, we have one line, and that line is called New Earth. That's everything after Crisis on Infinite Earths, running all the way up to 2006's Infinite Crisis. And that's it. It's just one line, one universe. Everything that happened in DC Comics between 1985 to 2005 all happened in that one line. Now, 2005's Infinite Crisis brings back those 3 lines, is basically what it is. But during the time when everything was operating on that one line, Grant Morrison and Mark Waid had this idea, and they said, well, we can't do alternate realities anymore because there are no more alternate realities. So instead, what we're gonna do is we're gonna invent hypertime. And what we're gonna say is that instead of there being alternate universe that have always existed out there, we'll say alternate timelines. Basically, it's the same thing. It was bringing back alternate realities, but just calling them something else. And so what they said is, well, maybe the Flash goes back in time and does this. And instead of things happening the way they always did on that one line, then it branches off into another line and something else happens. And it was bringing in all these different alternate realities. Now, it would have worked. Basically, what you would have had is DC's version of Marvel's handling of alternate realities, and that would have been it. The problem is that no one used hypertime except for like Grant Morrison and Mark Waid. And so what you would have is in the Flash stories, you have events that would take place, there'd be alternate realities, and then you wouldn't have that anywhere else. And so through the reader off and it confused the heck out of him because people were like, but I thought there was only ever one timeline. But you read the Flash comics and it's like, well, there's a ton of timelines. There's all these different alternate realities out here and all these crazy things. And people are just like, but that doesn't make any sense. What DC did, at least what they seem to be trying to do with regards to DC Rebirth and especially New 52, is they're trying to blend in hyper time with their handling of the multiverse. So what DC basically says is, yeah, there's these alternate realities out there, Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, like they presumably exist out there somewhere. We don't really know what's going on with them and we don't know exactly how it all fits in because of what Manhattan's done, but we can say they all exist out there. But in addition to those universes that have always been there, if the Flash goes back in time and changes something, well then hyper time gets invoked and it's an alternate reality. And that's what this story is. This story is basically DC's version of Marvel's what if lines of stories. That's what you can imagine this to be. If this story, Super Sons of Tomorrow, was thrown into Marvel Comics, it would be, what if Superboy killed everybody? Like, I mean, that's basically what it would be. You know, what if Superboy killed 1 million people in DC Universe? That's what the story would be called. It's essentially a future where Superboy had killed 1 million people for whatever reason, which we'll talk about in this video. And then basically that future's version of the Justice League and Tim Drake, who is Batman, went back in time to try to stop it. That's basically what this is. So if that has melted your brain a little bit, feel free to kind of scroll back and watch it a couple more times. Hopefully it makes sense and it kind of sinks in, or give yourself a few minutes. I know that when I read things that are kind of confusing, I have to give myself maybe 10 or 15 minutes to kind of let it sink in, and then it'll make sense to me and that kind of a thing. But the fact remains, you know, getting caught up so far, we've pretty much run over it. I mean, Tim Drake is basically Batman from the future. He showed up and he's trying to stop some event that will lead to Jonathan Kent, the son of Superman, killing 1 million people. The result is that where Tim Drake had initially shown up and then basically ambushed the Titans and then tried to overpower Jonathan Kent, the result was that Jonathan Kent had basically charged up and let off this massive amount of solar energy. Now, the issue with this is that with Jonathan Kent essentially knocked unconscious, what happened is that Tim Drake used it as a means to argue, see, I was right. I told you guys he was dangerous. Now, this is one of those things where Tim Drake caused the problem that he was trying to avoid, or at least showed people what it was that Jonathan Kent could do by pushing and prodding him. But he actually has a point. If Tim Drake was able to push Jonathan Kent to the point where he would let off this solar flare of sorts, albeit with a small amount of damage, imagine what would happen if somebody that Jonathan Kent truly trusted pushed him to the extreme and forced him to just let off this massive amount of energy. Not only that, what if he flew into the sun and absorbed all this solar radiation, came back to Earth, and then exploded? Imagine the damage that he would do then. And so that's the concern that Tim Drake has. Jonathan Kent's going to destroy Metropolis in the future. He's going to kill millions of people, and it's a scenario that can be avoided. It's Tim Drake's attempt to change the past. Now, picking up with Jonathan Kent, of course, having been rescued by Damian Wayne, the interesting thing about this is that Damian Wayne looks at the solar flare of Superboy as something that can be used. Where on the surface, most people would say, well, it's exceedingly dangerous and it could result in the destruction of everything. And Damian Wayne's mind is this idea, if Jonathan can be taught how to control it, then it's a power he can use, so long as he doesn't abuse it or anything like that. But in Damian's mind, the reason why, Tim Drake's future came into existence was because Jonathan developed this new power and there was no one there to teach him how to use it. Now, again, the other half of this is, of course, the Teen Titans of tomorrow. And this brings back some characters that have been missing for quite some time. Cassie Sandsmark, Connor Kent, Bart Allen. Of course, we did an explanation video on Bart Allen, which you're welcome to check out if you want a wholesale understanding of his character. But the fact remains that they're basically the Teen Titans of tomorrow. They're the Teen Titans of the future. Bart Allen, of course, playing the role of the Flash, Cassie Sandsmark playing the role of Wonder Woman, and Connor Kent playing the role of Superman. Again, we don't really know what happened to their normal stand-in characters, but the result is that Tim Drake kind of comes from their future. And it's sort of interesting because it seems like there's a bit of not really distrust so much as a disagreement on what role they should take, where the Teen Titans seem to have just kind of been like, well, I mean, if we could stop it, that's cool. Tim Drake is like, well, then let's actually stop it. And he just jumps into the past and tries to find a way to take out Superboy Jonathan Kent. Now, it is kind of interesting because, of course, as we saw in the first video, Tim Drake had incapacitated both Batman and Superman, which removed them from the equation. And at that point, it was really just kind of left to the Teen Titans to try to pull it off. And where Tim Drake initially meets with the other Titans, absent Damian and Superboy, who are currently, on the road recuperating, Tim Drake actually makes a pretty compelling argument. Superboy doesn't know who I am, but if I was able to push him to the extreme to the point that he would lose his mind and he would basically destroy the entirety of Titan's Tower, then what does that say if someone like Damian Wayne betrays him? He trusts you guys, he believes in you guys, and he cares about you guys. If you betray his trust or you push him to the edge, the amount of energy, because it's directly intertwined with his emotional state, means that he would be even more heartbroken, which means it would be even more damage. And so again, it's actually pretty intriguing and it's a pretty legit argument. The other half of this is the nature of Raven, in the sense that Raven almost sort of goes along with this idea of Tim Drake, and she really kind of buys into it. her argument is, look, if what you say is that Jonathan Kent has a level of power that he hasn't really experienced before, he's got a new energy, this super bomb that he can't really control, and that a time will come when someone will push him to the edge, his emotions will get the better of him, and he'll wipe everything out of existence, then we have to control him, we have to contain him, if for no other reason than to keep him in stasis so we can teach him how to use his powers. You know, it's really one of those things where it's like we're capturing him, but we're doing it for his own benefit. And it's kind of intriguing because this creates a rift of sorts among the Teen Titans. The scenario on one side, you know, Aqualad and Starfire is, well, I mean, you know, let's not be so heavy-handed. You know, there's a lot that we don't know about all this. The other side of Raven is, but we have Tim Drake here and he's already given us the future, so we know what's gonna happen. And that's why it's so cool. That's one of the reasons why the writing of Teen Titans was so popular and remains so popular among fans. It's not a pretty white kids with problems comic book. It's a story where it's like, man, these are some serious issues that these kids are dealing with and a lot of philosophical themes and different things like that. Now, of course, the other half of this is that in the future, Connor Kent, Cassie Sandsmark, and Bart Allen, they're trying to locate Tim Drake within time. The problem with this is that, remember, when you're in the future and you're looking at the present day, you're basically looking at a flowing river. And so, you know, if you have like a pod or you have like an object sitting in that river, it's not still. It doesn't just stay there. It doesn't sit in one place. It flows along the river. And so what they're literally trying to do is cast a fishing line and try to grab that object out of the river. It's going to be hard to do. You can't just reach in and grab it because while it's there now, in an instant, it could be somewhere else. And it could be anywhere along the time stream. It's a needle in a haystack. So the cool thing about this is that Raven, you know, while the future Titans are trying to anchor on to Tim Drake, and while they do manage to get a hold of him, which basically says, look, we can now track his location, Raven basically uses a little bit of telepathic voodoo, offers a distraction of sorts, you know, has everybody fix Titan Tower, and then just disappears alongside Tim Drake and Beast Boy. And it's kind of cool because in their mind, you know, in the minds of all these different superheroes, everything's being fixed. In the mind of Starfire and Kid Flash and Aqualad, oh man, they're fixing Titan's Tower. We'll take care of that first, and then we'll go after Connor Kent. When in reality, none of that's happening. It's just as in shambles as it ever was. And so it's just, again, the telepathic powers, you know, the telepathic abilities that Raven has to kind of mess with the minds of people, which is kind of cool. But at this point, we switch over to really the last bit of the story, switching over to, you know, the Superman number 38. And again, this really picks up with the idea that the Teen Titans, to a degree, feel kind of betrayed by Raven, but using the powers of Aqualad are also able to locate where it is that Jonathan and Damian Wayne are located. Now, of course, once they find them, then it's like, okay, we have to figure out a way to contain this situation. Now, of course, the immediate reaction of both Damian and Jonathan is one to attack, and it's also kind of cool because where Damian Wayne did assemble his own Teen Titans, and where each member of the Titans do have their own history, either as heroes or just kind of living in isolation, but are well aware of their powers and what they're capable of, Damian Wayne's job as leader is to know their strengths and weaknesses. And so while he has no powers to speak of, he does have the mind of Bruce Wayne, which means he knows how to easily overcome each and every one of these Titans. Now, of course, this leads to a stalemate of sorts just because of the fact that Aqualad's like, look guys, enough. Like, this is ridiculous. We need to calm down. Everybody needs to chill and we need to talk this out. What this also leads to is the arrival of Connor Kent and Bart Allen and Cassie Sandsmark. Now, it's not immediate. Instead, it's actually Superboy saying, okay, look, if everybody's really on the hunt for us, you know, Jonathan Kent's like, if everybody's really looking for us, then we have to go to the Fortress of Solitude. It's the safest place for us to go. It's virtually impenetrable except by those who know explicitly how it works, which is to say those who can speak Kryptonian or understand the Kryptonian language, which of course Tim Drake does, which is how he was able to penetrate it because he was taught by Connor Kent in the future. But it is cool because when they get there, the place is in shambles because remember, at the beginning of the story, Tim Drake showed up, he used his knowledge of the Kryptonian language to infiltrate the Fortress of Solitude and then subdue Superman. Now, the other half of this is Jonathan. Now, this is kind of cool because what Tomasi's doing is it almost kind of seems like he's drawing on a bit of Dragon Ball. If I'm going to be honest with you guys, that's almost kind of what it reminded me of. I mean, I don't know if Peter J. Tomasi watches Dragon Ball or even knows what it is, but it is kind of one of those cool scenes. You know, back when Dragon Ball Z first launched, Gohan was first introduced. When his father was in a dangerous situation, Gohan's power would emerge through his emotional state, and he would let off this massive amount of energy. His power level would skyrocket, you know, and it would get really, really cool. It was one of those funny things. His power was tied to his emotions. The angrier he got, the more reckless and the more powerful he got until he was able to control his fighting abilities and different things like that. But with Jonathan Kent, it's the same way because it's his dad. It's his anchor to the world he lives in. Rescuing his dad from this container also sets in motion the idea that Jonathan Kent has a supernova power that he can't necessarily control. And in this instance, because his emotional state shifts in the extreme, his powers just kind of start running awry to the point that he can't control them. And this energy starts building up. And this proves the argument of Tim Drake. Someone is going to push Jonathan Kent to the edge and his emotions are going to take over. Reason and logic will take a back seat. His power will start surging and start enveloping outwards. And when it does, a massive amount of energy is going to explode. And that's going to be the end of everyone. And so it's both cool because with the arrival of Bart Allen, with the arrival of Cassie Sandsmark, with the arrival of Connor Kent, we basically get them fighting alongside Superman and the modern day Teen Titans. And in truth, this is a Teen Titans dream. I mean, those people who were reading DC back in like the 1990s, they're just like, yes! Those folks who are reading Young Justice in the early 2000s, they're in the exact same boat. It's a return to familiarity for them, even if it's only momentary. For those existing fans, they finally get to see Connor Kent alongside Superman. They finally get to see Bart Allen return to the DC landscape, Cassie Sandsmark, the second Wonder Girl. They get to see all these things begin to sort of grow and progress and so on and so forth, and things begin to kind of shape up and take their rightful place. Now again, it's temporary. For those of you guys who are non-comic readers, fans see this as DC kind of opening the door and saying, hey guys, like, look what's behind the door over here. I mean, we're gonna close it back, but like, that's what's waiting on you in the future of DC Rebirth. And it makes people so excited because in this moment, with this conflict beginning to sort of wind down, what ends up taking place here is that you end up having Tim Drake who kind of jumps in and absorbs all this energy that's essentially being let off by Jonathan, kind of absorbs it into himself and then vanishes into the time stream. Now, of course, this leads directly into the aftermath, but one of the things that I want you guys to notice here is that where Tim Drake absorbs all this energy and he's just kind of shot into quote unquote hyper time or into the multiverse, we end up seeing all these different universal events that have ever taken place. This is very reminiscent of the Button. Remember, during the Button storyline, when Batman and the Flash were thrown into the multiverse, it was all these alternate realities. The scene from DC Universe Rebirth #1, the one shot that set all this in motion when classic Wally West finally came back. The idea of Crisis on Infinite Earths is shown here. The original Anti-Monitor, 0 Hour, Crisis in Time, when Hal Jordan was parallaxed and went crazy, and killed all the Guardians. All these extremely important moments are shown here. All these things, basically every single event that's ever happened in DC Comics is represented in this multiverse. And what this means is that this version of Tim Drake can land anywhere. Tim Drake could land in the middle of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Tim Drake could land in the middle of Emerald Twilight, in the middle of 0 Hour, Crisis in Time. He could land in the middle of Infinite Crisis. This is DC reminding us where things stand. There's a reason why you don't see the original Superman from 1938 here. You don't see Action Comics #1 represented here. What DC seems to be saying is, okay, so here's how things progressed. Barry Allen went back in time and saved his mom's life, and that spawned Flashpoint. And Barry Allen's like, man, this Flashpoint universe sucks, so I gotta let my mom die in order to make sure everything goes back to normal. He goes back in time to let his mom die, and things were supposed to go back to normal. But like Dr. Manhattan intervened for some reason, and we don't know why, and changed everything. And so we got all the stories from 2011 going forward until DC Universe Rebirth #1. That seems to be what DC's saying here. I'm not gonna take that as an absolute certainty, and we won't really know until the whole Rebirth initiative ends, and then we're with the final DC universe in terms of like, hey, we're done changing everything, we're done retconning everything, we are finally done, we're off to the races now, here's how it's going to be going forward. We won't know until we get to that point, until presumably Doomsday Clock ends is really what I think all that. So I think Doomsday Clock will be where we learn everything that Dr. Manhattan did. But okay, so picking up with the epilogue of Super Sons Rebirth, it's really fun. I mean, dude, I love the whole idea of like Super Sons of Tomorrow, but I love the Teen Titans and the Super Sons comics. It's so fun. This is one of the things I really enjoy. I was never like a huge reader of Teen Titans. I mean, I watched the show back in the day, but I was never like an avid Teen Titans fan. And so for a lot of people who've been reading Teen Titans for years, I'm sure for a lot of you guys, this is just like, yeah, this isn't anything I haven't seen before. I love it, but I've seen all this before. But to me, it's brand new. This is all basically new stuff to me, and I love this whole thing. I especially love the character of Jonathan Kent. Jonathan Kent is definitely my favorite character in DC Rebirth. Like it's amazing how hilarious he is because he's just like a teen and he has fun and all that kind of stuff. But again, this is a really, really important moment because remember, in the last video, we had talked about how Tim Drake had come from the future as a byproduct of the fact that somewhere along the line, Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, would essentially develop his father's, or really, Superman's solar flare power, basically allowing him to kind of discharge this massive amount of solar energy due to the fact that Damian Wayne would betray him at some point. And so as a result, when he discharges all this solar energy, it would wipe out the city of Metropolis. It would kill like 1 million people. And then in turn, Superboy would just kind of become like, this character that everybody's looking for to kind of try to track down. But the whole idea of Tim Drake was to find a way to go back into the past and stop it from happening. So it was pretty cool for what it was because this version of Tim really became a much darker version of the character that he is now. But the fact remains here that when the kind of climax to the Super Sons of Tomorrow story happened and Jonathan Kent began to kind of emanate this solar flare power, essentially Tim Drake absorbed that energy and was then thrown into the time stream. And this is huge because, again, this is one of those instances when DC gives us like these little flashbacks to basically tell us, here are the things that have happened and here are the things that haven't happened. So for example, I mean, you see from like this opening page here, you know, this giant splash page, that things like Crisis on Infinite Earths happened. Things like, you know, Infinite Crisis, Superboy Prime, that happened. But also DC Universe Rebirth #1, the events of Forever Evil, those things took place too. Now again, what I'm really expecting from DC, to kind of sidetrack here for a second, what I'm really expecting from DC is to give us this kind of 0-hour crisis in time event, which is to say, we might not necessarily get a crisis, but once the whole rebirth thing is basically done, which is to say, when we get an explanation of like what Dr. Manhattan did and how his actions impacted and changed everything, that it'll eventually segue into DC, most likely giving us like a timeline. Like basically, here are all the things that have happened that are in continuity. Like that's kind of what I expect to take place. But the fact remains here that at this point, Tim Drake, this future version of Tim Drake is in the time stream. So basically he could be anywhere and at any point in time. We have no idea where he is. He could end up at any point from the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths all the way up to the modern day. So who knows when he would pop up. And it's cool because it allows DC to really offer, even if they wanted to, like an ongoing series or a mini series or something like that, where this future version of Tim Drake is he's our tour guide for the multiverse, or really for like the entire timeline of DC Comics. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. The other half of this, and something that kind of caught me by surprise with this aftermath, this epilogue, is that we basically have the Titans of Tomorrow meeting the new superheroes, meaning the existing superheroes, you know, the current Superman and, you know, the Teen Titans and so on. Superman doesn't know who they are. And that's kind of the interesting thing. Remember this, on the surface, our initial response, if we've forgotten a couple things, our initial response would be, but they should know each other. Like they should definitely know who the other is. And so again, I want to take this bit of a second, this little bit of an opportunity. I want to talk about Superman for a second. A lot of people are still a little bit confused about Superman Reborn. They're really just kind of confused about how that works and how the new Superman's origin story works and all that kind of good stuff. So to offer an explanation here, let's take DC Rebirth. When DC Rebirth kicked off, which is to say the release of DC Universe Rebirth #1, we had two Supermen in the main DC universe. We had the Superman that arose during the events of, you know, the New 52, basically, when DC rebooted and said, we want you guys to treat superheroes like we've never published them before. We had this new, younger version of Superman, and then we had the classic Superman. And the whole idea with this is that it was DC basically saying, hey, look, you know, somebody did something, somebody messed with things. Now, because of what's happened in DC Rebirth so far, what we can kind of presume here, and again, you know, it's still a little bit fuzzy in terms of how it works. What we can kind of presume here is that when Flashpoint happened and, you know, Barry Allen went back in time, you know, saved his mom's life, and then went back in time and let her die after realizing how bad everything got and so on and so forth, Dr. Manhattan stepped in and messed with things. Presumably he made the new Superman, whatever the case may be. But the result here is that we ended up having this quote unquote new universe that existed. And then you had classic Superman who basically left his universe and arrived in this one. And so that's how we had those two Supermen there. We basically had two versions of the same character who were just from two different universes, more or less, two different points in time. And the result was that with Superman Reborn, it was basically taking those two versions of Superman, bringing them together, and then just erasing the entire history of the individual characters. And so as it stands right now with this version of Superman that we see here, this one in this story right now, and the one that we've seen after the events of Superman Reborn, basically there is no classic Superman in the sense of like the death of Superman and all those old stories. There's also no New 52 Superman. What there is this Superman, and then whatever parts of his past DC wants to keep intact. So we know that this version died back in 1992, you know, in the death of Superman. That happened. He was killed by Doomsday. We know that those kind of events have taken place, and the new origin was given to us as part of the aftermath of Superman Reborn. So again, that's kind of what this version is supposed to be. In terms of the role he plays, he's basically classic Superman, but in terms of, you know, this being an exact copy, not necessarily the case. That classic Superman that we're familiar with, that one's basically gone. And this is kind of like a merged version of the two characters. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. I don't really know how to explain it any clearer than that. So I don't know. And you might have to kind of investigate outside of my videos in order to find a way that's more conducive to your ability to understand it. But the fact remains here, it is kind of cool because again, this is why this version of Superman doesn't know these Titans. Now, if Superman Reborn never happened and the New 52 Superman died and the classic Superman was here and his origin story was never rewritten, he would definitely know these characters. He would say, yeah, Connor Kent, I remember you. How come you don't remember me? You're basically a cloned version of me from when I died and Lex Luthor made you. How come you don't remember me? With Bart Allen, it would be like, yeah, I remember you. you? Like, you're the grandson of Barry Allen. You were brought to the 20th century because your powers were out of control, and then, you know, Wally West and a handful of others managed to find a way to keep them in check and basically set you back to normal. I remember your whole past. I remember you when you were this tall. Like, I mean, I imagine that's how Superman would respond. But again, he doesn't necessarily have all the same memories, but we would kind of expect him to, you know, to a degree. But again, that's why it's so interesting, and that's why it's so intriguing, is because DC's very much playing it by ear. Now, even then, with like the character of Beast Boy, his initial response is, well, I feel like I know that girl Cassie Sandsmark. Like, I feel like we've met before. And this is really kind of like DC hitting home with the idea that maybe there is a connection here, that if Dr. Manhattan stepped in and modified everybody's memories and changed everything around and moved these pieces around the board in order to make it look different than it actually was, then maybe this effect is starting to wear off. But again, we can't really take that by just like one phrase, by one sentence from Beast Boy. We can't really ride that as an absolute certainty. At this point, it's just kind of like haphazard guessing. Now, the other funny thing about this is Kid Flash. I love Kid Flash. Love Kid Flash. He's almost as awesome as Jonathan Kent. And the funny thing about this is that where everybody's kind of talking about the aftermath and the Titans of tomorrow and whether or not they should ask about the future and if they should get answers and different things like that, Kid Flash's whole response is, hey, I got something better than anything we could have gotten. And when people are like, what? He's like, a selfie. Which is amazing because it's so easy to forget in this story that they are teenagers. I mean, they're just young kids. You know, they're kids just kind of having a great time being superheroes, also dealing with teenage issues. Raven gets pissed off and destroys the phone. It is pretty funny, you know, these little interactions, things like that. But the other half of this is that this basically picks up with the whole idea of Superman addressing the issue of Damian and Jonathan Kent. Because Superboy effectively sits down and says, okay, the whole reason Tim Drake came here is because some point along the line, Damian, you're gonna betray my son. And when you do, he's gonna lose his mind and he's gonna destroy Metropolis. So you guys can't be friends anymore. You guys can't hang out. And it's kind of interesting. This is actually a really interesting scenario. This is the perils of time travel. This is the danger of time travel. We don't have an answer to the question of if Superman lets them stay friends, is that what leads to the conflict? Or if Superman refuses to let them stay friends, is that what leads to the conflict? We don't know. We don't have an answer to that. We don't know which one of these paths leads to this massive calamity. Maybe they both do. I mean, sure, you know, an argument can be made. Well, you know, things have changed just by virtue of Tim Drake going into the past and, you know, encountering them and trying to stop them. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It could very well just happen by a different means. The circumstance could unfold in a similar way, just under something a little bit different, you know, different conditions, but the whole event remains. Maybe it's Gotham City that Jonathan blows up instead of Metropolis. That's the cool thing about this. And that's why this is interesting, because it does leave the question out there. Has the entire conflict been prevented? Now, for his defense here, Damian steps up. And this is a cool thing. This is why Jonathan as a character has such a great impact on Damian. For those people who have been reading DC Comics for quite some time, really, you know, with like Son of the Demon, going all the way back to the introduction of Damian Wayne, his character's evolved a lot over the years. When he first showed up, in fact, he pissed off a lot of Batman fans. When he first showed up, he was just this really entitled, spoiled kid who believed the world revolved around him. It was his way or the wrong way. And that's really how his character was initially. Now, over the years, as different writers have evolved his character, he's grown the way that you would expect him to. A lot of this has been a byproduct of Batman stepping in and Batman basically saying, look, our job is to protect people. Our job is not to kill people who do bad things. That's the easy way out. I mean, there's been a lot of work that's been done on behalf of like Batman's character to kind of flesh out Damian Wayne. But in terms of like him being more of a brighter spot, him kind of growing up and realizing he's not the center of the universe, a lot of that comes from Jonathan Kent, because Jonathan Kent's kind of like this immutable force of happiness that exists. That's why I love his character so much, because he's just a fun character to read about. And so that's why him and Damian Wayne get along so well, because it's almost like yin and yang. It's like oil and vinegar. It's light and dark. It's this cool thing where these two characters who you would never expect to be friends just immediately hit it off, and they have an amazing friendship. But in a lot of ways, whether Damian realizes it or not, Jonathan Kent helps to impact him and make him a better person. The other half of this is, remember, despite the fact that Damian Wayne does have a checkered past, and even though he does, you know, has done some pretty shady things, he is an honorable guy. And so in his mind, it is basically, look, Jonathan's not just a potential member of the Teen Titans. He's not just a person that I've gone on adventures with. He's a friend. And where I come from, friends watch their friends' backs. That's very important. That's a very significant thing when it comes to his character, because it really hits the evolution of Damian Wayne as he's grown over the years. And so that's why it's so cool. So what they end up doing is basically calling a vote. And it's actually really funny because they're teleported to the Justice League Watchtower by Superman. And like their initial response is like, dude, we're in the Justice League Watchtower, man. Like, it's really funny. Like they're sitting down in like the big superheroes chairs. And it's funny because it's like, man, like we get to sit at the adult table. It's really, really interesting. And it's really intriguing because this again hits home with the idea that they're teenagers. They're having fun. You know, it's what's so cool about that. That's why I love the Teen Titans so much. Now, of course, Damian's response is, okay, we basically got to call this to a vote. And Damian's in the corner of Jonathan Kent. He's like, look, let's make him a partial Titan at the very least. Now, even if it's only one of those circumstances where Damian's like, look, we got to keep an eye on Jonathan Kent just to make sure he doesn't lose his mind, it is cool because he is basically voting for Jonathan to be rolled in when Damian was staunchly against it initially. His whole stance was, you're not a teenager, you're a preteen, you're not old enough to be on the Teen Titans. Now, of course, this also sees the arrival of Batman, you know, after having come to more or less after being defeated by Tim Drake, kind of knocked unconscious. And he basically says, okay, let's take a vote. And the result is that, you know, everybody's kind of like, no, we're not really in favor of Jonathan Kent joining the Teen Titans. Now, it's not because they hate Jonathan, right? I mean, there may be a little bit of fear there, maybe a little bit of concern, but the bigger idea here is that when Tim Drake showed up, Tim Drake dismantled the Teen Titans so fast and so easily. Now, keep in mind, Batman Incorporated way back before the New 52, or I guess really it was Batman Incorporated when New 52 was launched. That basically confirmed that Tim Drake is probably the world's best detective, second only to Bruce Wayne. That he's beyond, you know, Damian Wayne, he's beyond Dick Grayson, he's beyond Jason Todd in terms of his detective abilities. He's just below Bruce Wayne. And so it's not like they went against the Joker and the Joker just dismantled them, you know, or the Riddler who tricked them. You know, it's one of the best detectives out there who knows all their strengths and weaknesses because he came from the future. But it is cool because what this means is that the Teen Titans were effectively fighting a villain that could predict all their moves before they made them. And so in order to basically be that much better, they have to be quote unquote unpredictable, which is to say they have to have a better understanding of each other. They have to know what all their strengths and weaknesses are. Now, this is not accidental. It's not like DC put this in there just for the sake of just having it in there. Way back in when the Justice League was first launched back in 1960, one of the first things the Justice League did in order to instill trust in each member of the team was to reveal their identities to each other. To basically say like, here's our secret identities. You know, I Batman am Bruce Wayne. You know, I Superman am Clark Kent. I Wonder Woman am Diana Prince. I the Flash am Barry Allen. It was cool to see that kind of thing because it instilled trust. Now, this is why this is done. It's a homage to the old school Justice League story, but it's designed to hit home with the idea that the only way to really know someone is to let your guard down. It's to basically say, okay, all my cards are on the table. I'm not holding anything back. They might accept you, they might reject you, but you have no regrets under the circumstances. And that's what the Teen Titans have to do. They got to throw their cards out there. They got to just spill out their strengths, their weaknesses, their fears, their hopes, their desires, and make themselves stronger as a team. So that instead of viewing each other as just people who fight alongside other people, they view themselves as a family, that they're invested in each other because they find a common connectivity, they find a common theme, something that unites them under a singular banner. And until they're able to do that on their own, there's no room for new additions. And so the result is that Jonathan Kent is basically sit on the sidelines and he's effectively not allowed into the Teen Titans. So again, that's really how this epilogue ends. And it's a great epilogue to this whole thing. I love this story. It's a great little follow-up, great little aftermath. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like and I will catch you all later. Peace.